On the evening of September 7th, 1900, Galveston, Texas was the most important city in the American South. Its port moved more cotton than any other in the United States. Its banks financed half of Texas. Its hotels were full. Its streets had electric lights. Its newspapers covered London and Paris with the easy confidence of a city that considered itself their equal. 36 hours later, between 6,000 and 12,000 people were dead. The city, its wharves, its hotels, its Victorian neighborhoods, its entire sense of itself, had been erased so completely that survivors walking through the wreckage the next morning could not find the streets they had lived on their entire lives. The deadliest natural disaster in American history did not begin with a warning. It began with a weather report that said, "Winds increasing, some flooding possible." That was the last official communication Galveston received before the island went dark. This is what those 36 hours looked like from the inside. Galveston in 1900 is not what most people picture when they hear Texas. There are no ranches here, no open plains, no frontier mythology. This is a port city, dense, cosmopolitan, and rich. 37,000 people live on a barrier island 27 miles long and never more than 3 miles wide, surrounded entirely by water. The Gulf of Mexico to the south, Galveston Bay to the north. The nearest mainland sits 2 miles away across a wooden wagon bridge. That bridge is the only land exit from the island. The Strand, Galveston's main commercial street, earns its nickname, the Wall Street of the Southwest. Cotton brokers, shipping agents, insurance underwriters, import merchants. The smell on the Strand on a weekday morning is coffee from the import warehouses, printer's ink from the newspaper offices, horse manure from the delivery wagons, and underneath it all, the faint salt pull of the Gulf, which is present everywhere on this island, in every room, on every piece of clothing, worked into the grain of every wooden building. Behind the Strand, the residential streets are a catalog of Victorian ambition, grand houses with wraparound porches, churches with proper steeples, a new medical college, a streetcar network, gas lighting being replaced block by block with electric. The island has one serious flaw that everyone knows about and nobody has fixed. It is completely flat. The highest natural point in Galveston sits 8 feet above sea level. The Gulf of Mexico sits at 0. 8 feet is the entire margin between the city and catastrophe. A seawall had been proposed. Engineers had drawn the plans. The city council had reviewed estimates and tabled the project twice. Too expensive, too disruptive, too unnecessary given that nothing truly catastrophic had ever happened. The city was right that nothing catastrophic had happened. It had simply not happened yet. Isaac Klein wakes before 5 in the morning. He is the chief meteorologist of the Galveston Weather Bureau, and his barometer reading from the previous night has been bothering him. He walks to his instruments. The pressure has dropped further overnight, significantly. He sends an urgent telegram to Washington. He does not wait for a reply. He goes to the beach. What he sees there concerns him more than the numbers. The swells rolling in from the Gulf are 6, 8 feet. Enormous, but the wind is still calm. That combination means the storm generating those swells is still far away and moving fast. Too fast for anyone on this island to outrun. He gets in his buggy and drives up and down the beachfront, telling everyone he passes to go inland, cross the bridge, and leave the island. Most of them thank him politely and go back to watching the waves. By 8 in the morning, the beach hotel is serving Saturday breakfast. Guests sit at the long windows facing the Gulf, eating eggs, watching the surf with the relaxed appreciation of people on holiday. The waves are extraordinary. Tall, dark green, crashing with a force that rattles the window glass. A few guests ask the hotel manager if they should be worried. He says no. The hotel has stood through many storms. On the residential streets a few blocks inland, families are going about their Saturday. Markets are open. Children are running errands. The wind at street level is noticeable but not alarming. The sky is wrong, a gray-green color that nobody has a name for. But the sky in Galveston is often strange in hurricane season, and September is hurricane season, and nothing catastrophic has ever happened. At noon, the water arrives from both directions at the same time. The Gulf pushes over the southern beach. The bay floods the northern streets. Within 2 hours, Every street on the island is underwater. The bridge to the mainland went under mid-morning. The telegraph lines go down at 12:30. From that moment, Galveston is completely cut off. No communication in or out, no escape possible. No way to tell the mainland what is happening. The storm is still 4 hours from its peak. By 4 in the afternoon, the wind is sustained above 100 miles per hour and still climbing. It is no longer possible to stand upright outdoors. People still on the streets are moving on hands and knees through chest-deep water, grabbing fence posts and tree trunks, going from one handhold to the next. The noise is what survivors remember most. Not the sight of the water, not the darkness coming, the noise. At that wind speed, it is not a howl. It is a sustained physical pressure on the ears, like being held underwater, layered with the sound of the city being taken apart around you, the crack of timber, the grinding collapse of walls, the impact of debris moving through the surge. One survivor, a young clerk named Arnold Wolfram, writes later that at some point in the late afternoon, he stopped being able to think. The sound had overwhelmed the part of his mind that turned information into meaning. He acted on instinct alone for the next 6 hours. The electric power goes out at 6 in the evening. 1 second, the city has light, however dim through the storm. The next second, it has none. The darkness that follows is absolute. No moon, no lit windows, no reference point of any kind. Only the sound and the water and the movement of things in the water that cannot be seen. This is the detail that separates the Galveston storm from any abstract idea of a natural disaster. It is not just the violence. It is the violence in complete darkness, in water above your waist, with the city being destroyed around you, and no information at all about whether the building you are in will be standing in an hour. Every decision is made blind. Every sound could be the last one. By 9 at night, the surge peaks at 15 feet above normal sea level in the hardest hit sections of the island. In some parts of the western end, possibly higher. What that means in practice is that entire city blocks do not flood. They are removed. The surge moves through the low sections of Galveston the way a hand sweeps pieces off a table. At St. Mary's Orphanage on the western end of the island, 10 nuns from the Sisters of Charity have 90 children in their care. As the building begins to shake apart, the nuns open the supply closet and take out the clothesline rope. They cut it into lengths. Each nun ties several children to her own body. Arms, waists, whatever holds. The logic is simple and devastating. If the building gives way, no child will be pulled from an adult's reach in the dark water. The building gives way. 3 children survive, found the following morning in a tree half a mile from where the orphanage stood. That tree is still there. The orphanage site is a parking lot. The eye crosses the island sometime after midnight. The wind drops. The water settles. Survivors lowered themselves from rooftops and treetops into a stillness that feels completely wrong after hours of roaring chaos. What they find in that stillness, what they feel with their hands and feet in the dark water, is wreckage, timber, clothes, objects without names, and everywhere, the dead. One survivor describes waiting for 2 hours through chest-deep water before dawn, trying to reach a relative's house 2 blocks away, and losing count of the bodies he touched in the water. He stopped counting at 30 before he had gone half a block. The storm produced 2 kinds of stories, the ones that ended and the ones that did not. Isaac Klein's house became an impromptu shelter as neighbors fled to it through the rising water. By evening, 50 people were packed inside a structure built for one family. When the surge lifted the house off its foundation and sent it drifting through the flooded street, those 50 people rode it, clinging to walls, to each other, to whatever held. The house came to rest against a debris pile 3 blocks away. Klein survived. His wife, who had been on the ground floor when the surge hit, did not. He spent the remaining 40 years of his life insisting he had done everything possible to warn the city. The historical record suggests he did nearly everything. The word that matters is nearly. A school teacher named Louisa Houston. Her account is among those Clara Barton collected in the weeks after the storm. Climbed to her roof as the ground floor filled and tied her 2 children to the chimney stack using strips torn from her own dress. She then held the ends of those strips in her hands throughout the night. 8 hours. Through the peak of the storm, through the darkness, through the noise that had taken Arnold Wolfram's ability to think. When rescuers found her the following morning, she was still on the roof, still holding the cloth. Her hands had locked and could not be opened without help. Her children were alive. She had not let go once. Then there are the ones the records never captured. Between 8 and 12,000 people died. The range exists because entire families were erased. No survivors to report them missing, no names entered in any post-storm register, no one left to write them down. The city tried to bury the dead at sea. The Gulf sent most of them back. So the city built funeral pyres on the beaches and burned them. The fires burned for 3 days. The smoke reached Houston, 45 miles inland. Everyone in Houston who saw it knew what it was. Nobody said it out loud. What Galveston did next is one of the most extraordinary things any city has ever done. It did not accept what happened as a verdict. It did not move to the mainland. It did not shrink. It looked at the specific problem, a flat island sitting 9 feet above sea level in the path of Gulf hurricanes, and decided to fix it by engineering. First came the seawall, 17 feet high, 16 feet thick at its base, 10 miles long, concrete and granite and steel, curved at the top to deflect wave energy rather than absorb it. Completed in 1904, 3 years after the storm. Then came the part that still seems barely believable. Every building still standing in Galveston was jacked up on hydraulic lifts. Steel pipes were driven down through the island's sand. Dredges out in the Gulf pumped 17 million cubic yards of material up through those pipes, under the raised buildings, filling in the space beneath them until the grade of the entire city had been lifted, by as much as 17 feet in some sections. The process took 7 years. When it was finished, Galveston sat on ground that had been manually built up to match the seawall standing in front of it. In 1915, a hurricane hit Galveston with winds nearly as strong as the 1900 storm. The surge reached the top of the seawall. 8 people died. 8, against 8,015 years before. That is what engineering and refusal looks like when it actually works. But a seawall cannot rebuild confidence. It cannot undo the decision made by hundreds of businesses after 1900 to relocate to Houston, rather than return to an island that had proven, once, it could disappear in a single night. The commerce that had defined Galveston as the Wall Street of the Southwest moved northwest and did not come back. The standard account of the Galveston hurricane treats it as unforeseeable. A storm that came from nowhere with no warning and could not have been predicted with the technology available in 1900. Neither part of that is true. Cuban meteorologists had tracked this storm from its formation and issued precise warnings to the United States Weather Bureau days before it reached Galveston. Those warnings were not passed on. The chief of the Bureau in Washington had a documented professional contempt for Cuban meteorological science and standing orders that Cuban forecasts were not to be relayed without his personal approval. His approval was not given. The storm the Cubans had correctly identified, tracked, and warned about reaching Galveston without those warnings ever arriving. 8,000 people died because one official in Washington did not believe that Cuban scientists knew what they were talking about. And the myth persists that Galveston fully recovered. In engineering terms, the seawall worked perfectly. In every other sense, the city it was built to protect had already changed beyond recovery. Galveston today has 50,000 people. Houston, the city that grew in Galveston's place after 1900, is the 4th largest city in the United States. The storm did not just kill people. It decided which city would define Texas for the next 100 years. On the morning of September 9th, survivors came out into a city that was largely not there. The western third of the island had been swept clean. The debris line, a ridge of timber, furniture, bricks, and everything the surge had gathered as it moved, stretched for miles across the middle of the island. On the Gulf side of that line, open sand where neighborhoods had been. On the city side, broken buildings, some tilted, some collapsed, some still standing with no explanation for why. The sky was clear. The Gulf was flat. The sun came up over a city that had, 12 hours before, ceased to exist in any organized sense. Isaac Klein stood at the debris line that morning and wrote later that the silence was the worst part, not the destruction. He had expected destruction. The silence. A city of 37,000 people makes constant noise. On the morning of September 9th, Galveston was quiet in the way that only a place with most of its people gone is ever quiet. The seawall still stands. Walk along its top today and look south at the Gulf, then turn north and look at the city behind it. That wall is the answer Galveston gave to the night of September 8th, 1900. Concrete and refusal. The most honest monument to a disaster that America has ever built. Give me a comments down below on this topic, how Galveston raised an entire city. The engineering project that should have been impossible.